The design of the Klingon Bird-of-Prey was inspired by a football uniform, with parts of the wings resembling shoulder pads and the front of the ship taking inspiration from a football helmet. This is apropos since today's guest, J.G. Hertzler, believes all Klingons are linebackers. Hertzler played several characters on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but is best remembered as the Klingon General Martok. He's released a memoir, and we not only talked about Klingon football, but also about his theatrical career, why he was threatened by the mob, and the unusual way he landed the Martok role. I'm T. Rick Jones, and this is your Daily Star Trek News. So let's talk about your book. I really enjoyed it. What made you decide to write a memoir during the pandemic and write it to your daughter?
Well, I had to find something to do. I mean, it was just, we live in the middle of a cornfield in rural upstate New York. And not only are there no people around here, but there's the occasional fox, quite a few deer, and that's about it. So without the usual, gallivanting around the world to various Star Trek events, it's suddenly the harsh reality of reality came here, and I said, I can't sit here and do nothing. There's no theater. There's no nothing.
Yeah.
So I decided to write, and I've always written. If I could do it all again, I would definitely not be an actor. I've never liked acting. I do love writing and directing. And I wrote 2 books on request from Paramount called Left Hand of Destiny. 2 parts. And Jeff Lang came on for the second part. My daughter was born in the middle of that. So she was born when I was 50, almost 50. I was 49 3/4. Let me see. She was born in June. So I was 49 and a half. Oh, so I said, you know what? Maybe I can catch you up. She said she would drop a few things that I said, well, yeah, that was Dad. You never. Oh, that's right. So it happened too many times that I said, you know what? I've got to fill her in, and my sisters, 2 older sisters. She said, they've called me. I never knew that. I don't know anything about that. I didn't know any. We've all gone our separate ways. You know how you do, and
Sure.
Life and your original family are not necessarily included with everything.
Yeah.
I said, I figure I'll just write this and fill her in with some of the gaps that she doesn't.
Yeah.
The people, the relatives, her, her ancestors, history, family history, nuclear family history, as well as a career. And because she knows nothing about, me playing football.
You said something just now that I want to follow up on. You said you never really liked acting. Explain that, because you've been an actor your entire career, and you're a fine one. You've done Shakespeare, you've done Star Trek, you've done everything in between, you've directed. So what is it about acting that you don't like, and why did you continue to do it? It's not a stable career.
T, what is your first name, T?
Well, Thomas is my first name, but I go by T Rick or Rick. You can.
Right. Well, why did you leave the name Thomas?
Oh, I see where you're going. That's a great question. I don't quite remember. It had something to do. I mean, listen, if I went by Tom Jones, everybody would ask me to sing "What's New, Pussycat" every time they met me.
I'd like to hear that right now, as a matter of fact. One of my favorite. Do you have the costumes?
When I went to join Equity, there was already a Rick Jones, there was already a Tom Jones or a Thomas Jones. So I had to pick a unique Equity name, and that was T. Rick Jones.
Well, there wasn't another John Hertzler, because Hertzler is an Amish name, and there's the contingent of Amish actors is very small.
Yes.
And in television, it's even smaller. But Bjorn Borg, I guess, was the best Amish. He wasn't Amish, but he played one on TV. The first Hertzler in this country was Jacob Hertzler, which I loved.
Sure.
And he was an Amish, the first Amish bishop in America, and it was 1749.
Wow.
And then after, let me see, his family spread out across Pennsylvania. All the Amish, practically all the Amish, landed in Philadelphia and then moved west. But my family went John, Noah, John, Noah, John, and I was in line to be Noah, which I love. I adore the name. I took it even I was a set designer for a while. I mean, I draw, so I got my master's is in set design. I don't like acting because I don't like people looking at me, T-Rex.
Okay.
And so, and plus I had this eye, my left eye is a lazy eye, and since birth. So if I get tired or anything, it'll tend to drift out or drift in. It's an amblyopia. I've had it all my life. Been wearing sunglasses since I was like 3. It's not true. But,
I was trying to picture it, John.
Yeah, I know. Me too. I think. So, but that's the reason. And growing up, I was always Johnny. My dad was John. Same thing.
Yeah.
My sisters still call me Johnny. I got one on a mountain in Mexico with the Peace Corps, and the other is in Annapolis area. And anyway, I wanted to tell Hannah, fill her about my sisters and the nuclear family that she never met that existed for 50 years before she was born.
Sure.
Because my parents were from the same small town in Pennsylvania, and their grandparents and their parents and their grandparents and the parents of the grandparents. I'm related to everybody in 3 counties in central Pennsylvania.
Sure.
But Hannah never knew anything about that. I mean, she knows it. She's been to the town, but I grew up, they would tell stories to each other, my folks, that they all had that common ground. They would refer to people, bedbug Bittner, what? But they knew who they were talking about.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's the reason.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, now in terms of acting, if I were more secure in my own looks, I think I would have been okay with acting, but I'm not, and I don't like people looking at me because in my mind, all they see is the things that are wrong, and hence, I would rather, I have visions of things as a director. I just said to my wife last night, I said, if I had known anything, I mean, I've had enough wonderful opportunities, as my book points out.
Yeah.
That had I known what the hell I was doing as an actor, anything about the art of acting or the art of finding work in theater, I would have been, I should have gone to Yale. I should have gone to Northwestern. I should have gone to Juilliard. If I could have gotten into any of these places. I was accepted for undergraduate school at Yale, and I was a football player. I just didn't want to play at that level of football. I wasn't big enough and good enough that I didn't want to sit in the bench. I wanted to play, so I went to a smaller school.
Yeah. football was an important part of your life. You only did it at the college level, but it was a big part of your life. It's part of the title of your book, A Klingon Linebacker.
Right.
Um, you tried baseball, and that didn't really work because of your lazy eye.
Yeah.
That wasn't really going to work. There were other sports that really weren't going to work. I would think I don't really follow football, but I would think football would require depth of vision as much as any of the others. So what is it about football that you were able to do even with this lazy eye?
Have you met any other self-proclaimed linebackers?
You're the first one.
Well, I've always thought of the Klingons as a race of linebackers. They're, I mean, they don't say, hello, how are you? They say, what do you want? And a linebacker, every linebacker, professional linebacker, I've never known any like nice guys amongst the professional linebackers. These guys are, they operate at a level of mania, barely controlled.
Yeah.
And so do Klingons. And that's why it's a connection. It's a double hit on one's personality to be a Klingon and a linebacker.
Sure.
But that's the point. My job as a linebacker wasn't to cover downfield passes or anything, just to stop the person across from me from moving.
Yeah.
That's the way I saw the job. And that's what I did. And I enjoyed doing it. I had a wonderful time until I was a senior. And I said, that's in the middle of, I was a senior in 68, which was the time of the Tet Offensive. I'm sorry, I was a senior in 72. And the Tet Offensive had started the same year I started college.
Sure.
And Vietnam was exploding my entire college career. Most of the time, outside of football season, I would participate in marches and demonstrations and trips to DC to protest the war. I was a government worker. I got a job in the Nixon administration. I only say Nixon administration because it was during his time in office. But it was one of the first offices created by the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, in 73. And I was one of the first employees. So I had this huge possibility open up in front of me. And it's what I did. I wrote the environmental affairs curriculum at Bucknell because that was my main interest outside of football. You read the thing about the job where the guy came into my office and I swear he was the big.
I was gonna ask you about that. Could you tell that story? Because that is an unbelievable story.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I got to do was I said, wait a minute. When I checked up on the recycling status within the federal government, every federal agency in the executive branch, I checked into, and I realized we were losing money in 1973, and we were making money in 1943 on the recycling of high grade items from the government. We were just throwing it into landfill or wasting it, or something else was going on. And
now, crucially, we should say this is during the Watergate scandal.
It is
that drums Nixon out of office. So
yeah,
it was. I think that's a crucial thing for people to understand that this is all going on during Watergate.
I even participated in demonstrations on the ellipse that was government workers against Nixon. And I was working in his White House, but not in the White House.
Yeah.
So I called the GAO, as Henry Fonda was, the GAO. I called them in to do an official audit of the practices that the federal government was doing in the public sector of recycling. Excuse me. And so that involved me joining the drivers of garbage and trash trucks, which all ran at night in the dark, to all the federal agencies, picking up the baled bunches of paper and different grades of paper. And I noticed we were leaving one particular kind of paper on the loading docks. And I said, why are we picking that up? And I think it was the driver who said, oh, somebody else gets that. That's somebody else's problem. I said, oh. And that was all the high grade stuff that was resaleable and recyclable, financially very lucrative. So I said, well, that's interesting. So a couple of days after I was riding in the truck, a couple of days after I visited these loading docks, a guy walked into my office, and I would have sworn it was Robert Shaw, and with a slight limp, although it wasn't, but it was an older gentleman. I was 23. Everybody was an older gentleman. I was 23. And this guy walked in, and he said, he closed the door. He said, are you, it was like more like, are you John Hertzler? Is that who you are? And I said, yes. Yeah. How can I help you? And he said, well, you've called in an audit. Yes, I'm using the audit. They said, well, there's not going to be an audit. I said, yeah, I just got off the phone with the guy over at EPA, and he said, no, John, there's not going to be an audit. I said, well, why not? Well, enough said. I said, what? Wait. Well, why won't there be? He said, because, John, can I call you John? It's connected. I was 23, brought up in an Air Force family, both parents from a small town in Pennsylvania, Port Royal. And I said, connected to what? And he reiterated, it's connected. I said, oh. I remember putting out 3 O's, and it's always been an acting lesson to me, by me, for me, that there's several interesting ways to say oh. And they all refer to different threats upon my life. And I said, I didn't say it. Then he left. He left the office, and about a couple days later, I rented a canoe, which you could do right there, just south of M Street, at the end of Wisconsin Avenue, where it goes down to the Potomac. There's a canoe rental place right near the Key Bridge.
Oh, cool.
And well, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. It was right at the Key Bridge. Francis Scott Key, writer of the national anthem, as well as a revolutionary, and I guess he was a cobbler or something. He was a laborer, craftsman. I rented a canoe and drifted out into the middle of the Potomac. It was fairly slow moving, and I just watched the traffic on the other side of the river, the George Washington Parkway. Under the Key Bridge, the George Washington Parkway, and here I was realizing that I wanted to make the world a better place, and I was not even able to keep organized crime from destroying the possibility of setting up fabulous recycling and saving the government and the taxpayers money. because of powers way out of my control.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just drifted in that down the river a little bit, past the Jefferson Memorial, into toward the basin, and watched that traffic of all those people lined up on the other side, the traffic jams of all government workers. And I said, I got to do something else. And that's when I decided to give acting a little bit more of a shot.
You had, like every actor, this isn't unique to you, but like every actor, you have had through your career a series of disastrous auditions that mostly did not result in a job. A few did, but this is true of any actor. So for those who are not intimately involved in theater like you and I, how, and you say you don't like acting anyway. So how do you, after a terrible audition that you know you didn't get the job, you made a fool of yourself, and you go home, and then you're like, I'm going to do it again tomorrow. Where does that come from? How do you keep going?
Yeah, I know that's a damn good question. What the hell was I thinking 50 years ago? There is also another disastrous audition that I didn't mention in the book. I mentioned quite a few.
Yeah.
But there was one when I was auditioning for Holly Hunter was going to be doing a show in a play on stage at San Jose, because she was friends with the artistic director, Timothy Neer, a woman. And it was for an Irish play. And Irish play, a contemporary Irish play. Wonderful play. Holly was about the best actor I've ever worked with. I mean, she was freaking incredible.
Yeah.
Fearless, because she was fearless. Now, you can be a little bit more fearless when you are a Holly Hunter who's won an Oscar. It allows you to be a little bit more fearless, I think. And that could have fed her for sure. But she was brilliant. And when I auditioned in North Hollywood, I was in LA then. I wore sunglasses, and she said, "Could you take your sunglasses off?" And I said, "Well, they're prescription." She said, "Well, I can't see your eyes." I said, she said, "Don't you realize that is the window to your soul?" I said, "Yeah, I don't want anybody looking down in there." And I got that job.
Your first role, everybody knows you as Martok, but your first role actually, and I didn't twig to this until I read your memoir, your first role in Star Trek was the Vulcan captain in Emissary, and you were on the screen for about 3 minutes, and then you were blown to smithereens. So what made you, had you seen Star Trek before? What made you audition for this?
I can't believe a professional stage manager is asking me what made me audition. To find something to do, to get a job. Although I had seen not religiously, I never was a Star Trek fan, a religious Star Trek fan. It started in '66. That was my junior year, and then, sophomore and junior and senior year in high school before I went to college. And I really started watching it religiously when Patrick Stewart was on the show, because at that point I had done a lot of Shakespeare, and been in a great admirer of Patrick Stewart as Gurney Halleck in Dune, one of the great, I used to wake up in the middle of the night saying, Muab, Kwisatz Haderach, Muad'Dib, words that had no meaning except in Frank Herbert's world. And I just love. Anyway, I've always been inspired by science fiction, uh, but not specifically directed at Star Trek until I got into watching Patrick and listening to him and knowing that he was also doing he was Ena Barbas in the Royal Shakespeare Company
Yeah.
productions, all those things. Patrick. Now that's another. Well, anyway, what did I? What got me?
You
You
were
asked me.
you were probably leading up to why you auditioned.
Yeah, yeah.
First, but you answered the first
For
part
a
of the
job,
question.
and
Yeah, right. That's yeah. But
I
how
had
did
a,
it come about? Did you just hear about the audition? Did your manager send you in? What? How did
no,
you?
nobody sent me in for that one. I called me in for that. It was just an audition,
Yeah.
and I got it. But the most memorable thing to me about that playing the Vulcan captain of the Saratoga
Yeah.
was that I made it possible by being blown up and exiting through the ceiling. Um, it made it possible for my first officer, Avery Brooks, to become the captain of Star Trek of DS9.
Well, we are forever indebted just for that.
Right. Um, but what was oddly, I think I wrote about this, didn't I? When I
You-
got blown up, which is
yeah.
I had like 4 or 5 words, and then they blew me up. Um, I was supposed to be pulled by a very strong uh, device, huge crane-like thing that would just when people get pulled off of horses and whatnot, and
Yeah.
they're jerked backwards or jerked. I was supposed to be jerked up through the explosion, up into the through the ceiling of the spaceship,
Yeah.
and the hall, right through the hall, and my stunt man. I had the harness on, but then when it got to they put the stunt man in my place, hooked him up, and jerked him up uh, into the up through the hall. Problem was he was about 20, 25 pounds heavier than me. And the springs were all set for my weight. And so he didn't actually, he wasn't jerked anyway, just sort of like rose up through the top of the hall of the ship as if he were, you could hear Monty Python's.
That's great.
Religious music. But so they didn't use the shot because it was ridiculous. But that's how I died.
Tell the story of your Martok audition because I think this is fantastic.
I was on the Paramount lot auditioning for a comedy, and I sucked. I wasn't. Comedy is not. I cannot plan to do comedy. I think I can say an occasional funny thing, but I cannot. I don't know. I don't have the skill.
Sure.
Anyway, so I screwed that up, and I was just angry at myself, saying, "Why would I bother? Why would I embarrass myself again?" And I was sitting on the lot, and the casting person for Star Trek, Ron Sermer, walked by. He said, "Hi, John," and I said, "Oh, yeah." And he turns around, he says, "Hey, you know what? You might be right for this role. Would you want to take a look at these sides, and when you're ready, come on up and meet people. Producers, writers for the show, DS9." And I said, "Fine. What is it? What's the role?" He said, "It's a Klingon." I said, "Oh, Christ, Klingon." Just grunting, wearing a mask. It's just the fights. Fine. So, and then I said, no. What? I'll do something different. I'll do a Klingon as if it's basically more like a Vulcan, where I have no emotional impact. I keep everything repressed, suppressed inside me in terms of emotion, and and you know, almost conspiratorial in the tone of voice and whatnot. So I went up and did it, and like that, and there was a thank you, and in the back somebody said, I don't know who it was, John, do you know what a Klingon is? I said, oh, let me guess. You want to see me screaming at you, intimidating you, pure vitriol, threatening violence with every syllable. Is that what they said? Yes. And I said, fine. And I took the chair. There was an old folding chair that was in the writer's room there. It was sitting right in front of me. And because it was cut on a slant to be flat on the ground, the feet came to a sharp point, supposedly covered with rubber, but the rubber was gone 50 years ago.
Sure.
So I picked up that chair and I threw it into the wall. The writers were all sitting over there, producers. I threw it over to the wall, and it stuck because these old buildings on the lot at Paramount were plaster and lathe, lathing.
Yeah.
Excuse me, not sheetrock. It's only the new buildings.
Yeah.
These were old wooden slats covered with plaster and painted. So it stuck right in between two of those slats through the plaster, and stuck there in the wall. And I was gesturing like a wild man, because when I did that, my thumbnail got caught slightly on the back of the chair and ripped half of it off, and it was bleeding out of my right thumb, my main gesturing hand, and I was throwing blood everywhere. It's like, and I finished, and there was silence, and there was another, good, thank you. And I turned around, still steaming. I'm sure the steam was, anyway, I left. And the next day, I talked to, I don't know who it was. I can't remember the agent now. But I apologized. I said, I'm sorry, I blew it. I just lost my temper. And he said, no, you got the job. I said, what? You have to go in for fittings and makeup and whatnot today, start getting, I said, when does it start? He said, like tomorrow or 3 days. And I said, I don't speak Klingon, don't worry about it. You'll be.
You were supposed to be in 2 episodes, right? And
episodes.
They liked the chemistry between Worf and Martok, and they were like, let's resurrect it. This is science fiction. We can do what we want. So you died at the end.
Oh, I got reduced to protoplasm. Yeah, I got reduced to like goo that was exploding.
Right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't you. It was a changeling. So they were able to say Martok's still alive, and they brought you back. So they liked the relationship between Martok and Worf. What's the chemistry like between John Hertzler and Michael Dorn? Are you guys friends like Martok and Worf are, or?
No. Michael's a very private person, and he's a very generous man, but he's very, it's an odd combination. Generous, but of spirit, but very private as well. It was a relationship between Martok and Worf. Worf is this supremely controlled being. I mean, Worf works like a son of a gun to try to make sure that he doesn't show anything that he doesn't want to show to anybody. He's very Worf is like, and Martok is just about the opposite end of the spectrum. So that might have been the reason it was a relationship that worked. Martok could draw. I remember one line I had. Worf said, "Yeah, that is not the Klingon way." And I said, "Worf, anything a Klingon does is the Klingon way." The opposite ends of understanding the Klingon way.
Yeah.
And so I could almost tease him. Well, anyway, whatever the reason, they said that was good. We can help tell Worf's story and your story because you have a great relationship. It's odd but interesting. And that was, I remember one of the best acting moments for me in the show was I think it was Soldiers of the Empire or Once More Into the Breach, whichever one. I was terrified of the Jem'Hadar.
That was Soldiers of
the Empire.
I think that was Soldiers of the Empire, yeah.
And that was LeVar Burton, who was about the best director. He was a phenomenal director. And I think because of two things. One, he just had talent as a director. And two, he had lived inside the makeup. He was also a brilliant actor. So he understood what actors do. So many directors don't know what the actor is going through inside to get what he wants on the outside. The great ones, of course, do, but I said during that show, Soldiers of the Empire, at one point, Geordi LeVar says to me, it's interesting. It's interesting how much emotion you can convey out of just the one eye. I said, so LeVar, what are you talking about? You don't have any eyes. And people loved the emotion that you conveyed, as Geordi.
Yeah.
He said, oh yeah, well, there's that. It was a very funny moment.
Did your Shakespearean training help you at all emote through the makeup? There are a lot of Star Trek actors who are Shakespeare actors. I'm sure you know this. You being one of them. Did you call on that at all with just the one eye and the forehead and all of that?
No, my personal thought is that why are so many classically now I'm not classically trained. I was lucky enough to start my career in professional theater by working in Shakespeare companies and surrounded by the best Shakespearean actors that were trained. So I had to pick it up secondhand.
Yeah.
That's why, anyway. But I have been blessed with working with some of the greatest actors that you will never have heard of. Guys like Al Corbin, he played Sir Captain Blunt in what was it? Richard III, I think. I was Hastings. He was Richard III. He was Blunt, Captain Blunt, and he had at one point he had to pass me a scroll on stage, and I can't even do it because my shoulder hurts too much. I ripped the hell out of my shoulders.
Yeah,
but he was like, Al was the most. God, I wish I had pictures of him. Maybe I can find it. Maybe there's something in the internet somewhere. Al Corbin. I worked with him in the Folger Theater, which is the recreation of the Globe Theater on a 1/5 scale in Washington, D.C. Remarkable luck to be able to use that as the first professional theater stuff,
Yeah.
Anyway, he would have to pass me a scroll. He had a scroll, and it was about the positioning of troops to fight Richard III, or backwards. Anyway, he had this scroll, and I had to meet him on stage. We were both in armor, things, you know. And he says, my Lord Hastings, here, take this to Wessex. Bear this scroll. And I would reach for it, and he would do one more wave with it. And here, this scroll, well, it is important now. Have I made it clear that you must. It took me a half an hour to get the scroll out of his hand, but I've never forgotten that freaking scroll, and it became very important to the audience. I don't know what the scroll was, but it's important. But Al, I remember him saying that, you come down, you haven't been on stage yet, and he comes down from a scene, and he's down into the basement where all the dressing rooms were at the Folger.
Yeah.
And he says, I said, well, how's the audience? And he would almost always say, awful, awful, dreadful. They don't understand a thing. So I was gifted to work, and I was in my early 20s there. He was in his probably mid to later 50s or 60s. And I worked with 50s, 60s, 70-year-old actors as peers, in these Shakespearean productions. And that's where I learned how to the basics of performing Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Now the language is a different thing. When I first started, I could not. I was at the Guthrie Theater, founded by Tyrone Guthrie, one of the greatest directors and Shakespearean people in the world. Founded that theater, Tyrone Guthrie, and they had a dialogue coach there. Can't remember her name, but she would talk all the time about Kelsey Grammer. Oh, you're very much like Kelsey Grammer. He has that wonderful. I believe Kelsey went to Juilliard. I'm not sure, but
yeah,
he was trained, and she said if you only had the same understanding of diphthongs that Kelsey does, I literally could not hear the difference between for this. I could not hear the difference between hand and hand. Hand, give me your hand. Hand. She said, where are you from? I said, Air Force bases all over. Hand, I could not hear it. And it's pretty basic. So understanding language and so many potential variations of language is learned when you're doing Shakespeare, because you're not only speaking with truth about the drama, but you're speaking with grace that involves the poetry.
Yeah.
And so it's a heightened form of language. So when Star Trek got a lot of classically trained or classically educated actors to play aliens, because as an alien you're speaking in a slightly heightened version of English, so it doesn't sound like you're from Southern Maryland or or out west, or it sounds like you're from another planet because it's sort of perfect.
How did getting cast in Star Trek change your life?
For the last 25 years or 23 years, I've been gallivanting around the world, meeting hundreds of thousands, perhaps, I don't know, it might add up to millions now, of people of Star Trek family who don't speak English or the Germans, Prague, we were in and all over the world. It's astounding. the depth of fandom for Star Trek, and except for the fact that Gene wrote a script, I would never have met any of these people or done any of these things. It has been my life for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
I've done an occasional theater job, but before that, I would have invested my time in directing a show, I've done live theater on a live radio on stage. I love doing that.
The book is called Confessions of a Klingon Linebacker. It's by you. Is it out yet? You sent me an advanced copy, I think. Is that correct? Is it available?
Yeah, it is. It's out. It's let me see if I can have a copy right here. It's hard. It's both paperback and hardbound.
Oh, there it is. Yes. Oh, yeah.
It is out. It's on Amazon. Now somebody said they couldn't find it on Amazon, but then I asked a friend of mine to see, and they had no problem. It's right there.
I will put a link in the show notes so people can easily find it and get to it and order it. It's a really, really entertaining book. It deals with Star Trek, but it also deals with all these other great jobs you've had, and your work in DC and your work in your college football. It's a really fun read. So
it's an American story, and uniquely so, growing up in a military family, traveling around the world, living in places that they all seemed, they all had 15-cent movie theaters on base, and they, as much as they were different, they were all exactly the same.
Yeah.
And it gave a little bit of the history of my family from that small town of Pennsylvania, some tragic events, some glorious events, and it's a life.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll inspire others to write their own.
John G. Hertzler, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so much fun, and I hope we'll talk again, because you're just a delight. So,
but I would love it. Thank you, T-Rick.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
John, thanks so much.
And Merry Christmas.
Kapla and Merry Christmas. If you want to ensure we continue to make content like this, why not support us on Patreon? Your donation not only helps us afford the hosting fees for our website and podcast, but also helps us to pay our writers. Even a donation of as little as $1 a month helps to keep us running. Head over to www.patreon.com/Daily Star Trek News to help us out. We at Daily Star Trek News wish you the compliments of the season, whatever holiday you celebrate. And of course, to those who observe it, we wish you a very Martok Christmas. Can somebody let me out now?